Hey, kids cook real food. Katie Kimball here for the Healthy Parenting Connector. And we're talking about anxiety today. Sorry, didn't mean to stress you out. We all feel it. We know that our kids are under the weight of the world, unfortunately, some days. And some days we share our anxiety with our kids. And as much as we want to teach our kids to share, we try not to share the anxiety too badly. So I'm very honored to have Noel Foy here with me today as an expert on anxiety. And particularly, we're going to talk about our kids on the autism spectrum or with ADHD and how anxiety can be settled for them and when it might be a bigger problem for them. So thank you so much for being here, Noel.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited.
Yeah, we'll do the official introduction and then we'll jump in. So Noel Foy is a mom anxiety coach, neuroeducational consultant, and the author of ABC Worry Free, a Mom's Choice Award recipient, and the upcoming children's book, Are You a Bird Like Me?, which sounds just delightful. She's a former classroom teacher. I bet she taught more than the 2 years that I taught. And a learning specialist who now runs workshops and does one-on-one coaching for schools, families, and organizations on lots of stuff: anxiety, stress management, executive function, and growth mindset. Her passion is to equip kids and adults with practical problem-solving tools to decrease stress, promote healthy change, and maximize each person's unique potential. And girl, practical is what I am all about. And that's why we're going to have such a good conversation. So where does your fascination with the brain come from? Like, how did you end up focusing so much of your work on anxiety and helping kids and that executive functioning brain?
So, believe it or not, it actually started from an accident that one of my sons had. Well, a series of concussions. He was a hockey player and he had several concussions and was diagnosed with post concussion syndrome. So, that really got me thinking, how is this going to impact his life? How is it going to impact his ability to learn? And I thought, even as a teacher, I didn't know a whole lot about the brain. There's not, honestly, a whole lot of training about that for teachers. So I said, I need to get myself to brain conferences. So that's what I did. And I started learning a lot about the brain and the impact that stress has on the brain, not just a concussion kind of stress, but stressors such as anxiety, frustration, anger. Believe it or not, Katie, boredom and lack of relevance to learning can be stressful. And I was thinking to myself, here I am, an educator for years, and how do I not know this? And it just got me thinking about all these kids that I taught and kids that I was seeing in schools, because I became a consultant over the years after my years as a classroom teacher and learning specialist. And I was noticing a lot of kids with their heads down on the desk, a lot of kids looking bored, a lot of kids spacing out, a lot of kids kind of freaking out. And it really set a light bulb off in my mind that, wow, a lot of these kids that we might think are uncooperative, checked out, or not motivated, maybe there's actually something else going on. It could be that they're in these states of stress. So that really got the wheels turning and changed the direction of my career path at that point. And what I really learned that I think it's important for every parent to know is that when the brain is stressed in those 5 states, or in one of those 5 states, basically your executive function gets hijacked. So all these really important skills you need to pay attention, to get started on a task, to stick with it when it's hard, to self-monitor yourself, to self-regulate yourself when things get hard, decision making, those go off the table. Those just go out the window when you're highly stressed. So that was just really eye-opening to me.
I know one statistic that I read that kind of hits me in the gut is when feeling anxiety, kids lose like 10% of their IQ or 10% of their memory potential. And I think for some kids, it's probably even higher. And you just think about kids with test anxiety. Here they are approaching, a task which they really need their upper human functioning brain for, and their anxiety is just shutting it right down.
Yeah, and it happens to adults too.
Oh, yeah.
So when we get anxious, and that executive function is hijacked, we might not remember the directions we just heard. We might not remember what we just learned. And this could be really frustrating for the kids and for the parents and also the teachers. They think I just taught something and that child is now having trouble getting started. And you think, I just gave the directions. What's going on here? Why? And they're like, the child saying, what are we doing? So in those moments, it's possible that they were thinking a lot of stressful thoughts and were not able to take it in those moments. So there's, some studies to show that our IQ actually drops when we're highly stressed, when our cognitive functions are impaired.
And I have to ask a follow-up question too. And first of all, let me point out the pure gold here for parents is that what you've said so far is that we've got to look a little deeper. The more we know, the more knowledge we have about the way our kids' brains and bodies work, the more we can see beyond the surface, right? That maybe they're not just being brats. maybe they're not choosing misbehavior, but I like that word hijacked. If their brain is hijacked, it may not be their fault, and it's up to us as parents or teachers to dig below the surface. So that is like lesson number one, big overarching lesson. When you mentioned boredom, though, I was actually really surprised because a lot of my other interviews have talked about how kids aren't bored enough, right? We're too overstimulated and we need a little boredom to get, tap into our creativity and to play. So I'm wondering if your boredom is a different type of boredom. Can you dig into that whole boredom, lack of relevance thing as a stressor?
Yeah. So let's say, for example, that a child is in a math class and they're thinking, why do I have to do this? I'm not going to be a mathematician. They're not seeing the relevance of the math in their life. And, another student who's maybe thinking, oh, writing, I'm not going to be a writer. Why do I have to really care about punctuation? So they're not quite seeing the relevance. And then if they're finding that let's say the lesson is really boring to them, they could be thinking, oh my gosh, I've heard this so many times. And they just start to think, again, we have to go over this again. So the boredom kind of kicks in that way. And the brain does like to be stimulated. And sometimes when kids are bored in class, they're looking for ways to make things a little more exciting. So then they might start to think of something that's interesting to them. They might daydream, or they might be, let's say, making a joke or become the class clown because they're looking for ways to make it a little more interesting. So that's another conversation for another day. One of the things I do is help teachers with student engagement and help them make the class and learning the content a little bit more interesting and interactive.
That's fascinating. The one time I was sent into the hall as a kid was when I couldn't stop reading the limericks that were stuck on the bulletin board next to me because I was so bored in 7th grade English class. So yes, case in point. But I think I see that there are two kinds of boredom, right? There's the boredom, the high quality boredom of unstructured time where kids can use their brains. And then there's the boredom of, I've done this before. I don't see how it connects to me. Right. And so it's not that teachers have to be entertainers, I'm sure is not what you teach, but we do need to build connections. How does this connect to your life? What is going to be the purpose of this? And that challenge that our brains need to be on the edge of difficulty, doing something a little hard, doing something a little challenging. So that's a great challenge too, even for parents thinking about chores or our homeschoolers and our unschoolers, talking about how these subjects connect. Now you mentioned the word hijack. When anxiety is hijacking our brain, how would this affect kids with ADHD, maybe in a particular way or differently? Or can you talk a little bit about the brain and anxiety and how it all works together?
Yeah. So the school setting is typically a little bit more stressful for kids with ADHD. When we think about the learning challenges they might have, thinking about how paying attention might be hard, staying focused and remembering, everything you've learned. So sometimes kids with ADHD have challenges with their working memory, their ability to remember and use that information that you just shared or just taught. So that can get frustrating if they start to get anxious ADHD and anxiety can kind of work against each other. A lot of kids with ADHD tend to have higher levels of anxiety because school can be a harder and more stressful place for them. So the way the anxiety works, not just for kids with ADHD, for anybody, is it usually starts with a trigger. And that trigger could be just a worried thought. So very often, like the inner critic kind of thoughts can start, or even like if I think back to when I was a kid, I didn't think I was very good at science. So even on the way to science class, I'm thinking worry thoughts like, oh, I don't know if I understand this too well. I hope there's not a pop quiz. Then I walk into the class, I sit down and I realize, oh gosh, she's going to do a pop quiz. I can just see she's got some papers she's going to pass out. And now I start to think all sorts of worried thoughts. So what happens when those worried thoughts activate this part of the brain called the amygdala? It's like a little alarm center of our brain that's like saying, Mayday, Mayday, my girl or guy is in trouble. And then that makes our body start to feel different. So all these stress chemicals start to pump through the body. Now we kind of feel the fast heartbeat. We feel, the clamminess, or we feel the headache or the stomach ache. You'll hear a lot of kids sometimes mention, oh, I got a headache or I got a stomach ache. They're usually telling the truth. So there's physiological changes going on in their body. And then before you know it, they're playing a video in their mind very quickly that this is not going to end well. And they go to fight, flight, or freeze. And what that looks like in real time, your kids in fight might throw something or break a pencil. They might say something nasty. Little kids might kick or bite. Your kids in flight might be asking to go to the nurse. They might be asking to go to the restroom. They might be sharpening their pencil multiple times. Your kids in freeze have that deer in the headlights look, or they put their head down on the desk and they just play dead. So they have kind of a frozen look on their faces and very rigid in their body. Often you can tell there's that tightness. And when kids are in those highly stressed states, executive function has gone offline. And these are, skills that we need to succeed in school.
Yeah, it's a kind of a complete block. And I see it with my own kids too, with like test anxiety, and sometimes studying just doesn't work. Like you said, the teacher will say something and then what did I say? Answer the question. And the child says, I don't know.
Yeah. And so anxiety makes us forget.
Yeah.
So when we get anxious, we're going to forget, even if we have some strategies, we might forget them in that moment. And we do know that it's going to affect our ability to remember. So for test taking, kids that have test anxiety, in those moments, that information is not going to be available to them. And if they can settle down, if they really have studied, it should be able to come back online if they can settle themselves back down. For kids with ADHD, they're typically missing that how part. So how to get started on something or how to complete a task. So that can get more stressful for them. And very often parents might not completely understand what's going on. And ADHD doesn't just impact academics. It also can impact relationships. It can impact your ability to keep track of your personal items and your planning in other situations beyond school. And even teachers, don't get a lot of training typically in ADHD and how to really help it live in the classroom.
It sounds like anxiety and ADHD are a double whammy because they're both affecting the same area of the brain in the same like negative deficit way.
Yeah, it definitely is in a way, because if the student gets stressed, and we know a lot of kids with ADHD might have challenges with self-regulation, right? So they would be more likely to be experiencing that hijacking of what happens is basically the emotional brain hijacks the thinking brain.
Well said. And I mean, parents and teachers, we want to help, And we'll talk about some really practical ways to help, but let's sort of start with the flip. What are some strategies you see parents, teachers, even therapists using that are kind of misunderstandings and end up not working the way we want it to?
Well, if we talk about anxiety, what I see happening sometimes is we think that kids who are anxious cannot experience any kind of discomfort, that they really need to know everything before they can step into something new. So we know that kids with anxiety tend to really have challenges with uncertainty, right? And all anxiety isn't bad. Some, anxiety is actually designed to protect us. So we want to pay attention, but sometimes, for example, kids with ADHD or kids who have an anxiety disorder, their stress response is activating more often and they're getting these alarm signals a lot more often. So what I have seen is that sometimes folks feel that we need these kids to always feel comfortable and that we have to overly reassure them and overly protect them. And what I see is a lot of rescuing and doing the thinking for the child and doing the work for them too much. And then what we're doing is we're depriving the kids of any opportunities to build skills and accept that I do have to learn to experience a little bit of discomfort. Let's say it's the test you were talking earlier about. We are not going to eradicate anxiety. And sometimes we might want to do that, but that's just not realistic. We can learn to tolerate and manage the anxiety. So helping that child learn to tolerate a little bit of discomfort and help that child with some strategies of how they could manage those big feelings when they show up, when they start to worry. So those are some of the things that I see the most. Sometimes accommodations that I consider have gone wrong is when, let's say, a child is allowed to go to the nurse during a test because they have test anxiety, but then they're not building skills while they're out of the room. They're sitting there on their phone, or they're having a nice chat. Now what's going to happen is it's going to look like going to the nurse was a good thing, because what happened was the anxiety came down. We haven't taught that child any skill except to escape when things get hard. That's the messaging that we're sending there. And if the child is leaving the classroom, if there's skill building going on to help them go back and face that situation when it happens again, that's a different story. But I sometimes just see kids being allowed to leave the room and not necessarily doing skill building. And that's really what anxiety and ADHD also needs, are skill building and problem solving.
And that's so well said. I mean, parents, listen up, right? Rescuing. We think we should rescue, like that. Our heart goes there, right? Our gut goes there. Oh, we want to rescue. We want to protect our kids. But that line, like rescuing, is not providing them an opportunity to build skills. It's teaching them to escape when things get hard. Like really, really important. Hard words for us to hear, but so important. And you just said something, that not all anxiety is bad. And that's fascinating. What do we need to do with our language and our perspective on anxiety to incorporate that idea that it's not all bad?
Yeah, so it's actually designed to protect us. So like if your smoke detector went off in your house, we would actually want to oh, we need to pay attention to that, right? Is there a real fire? When we check it out, we might realize, oh, it was just we needed a new battery, or perhaps somebody just left something in the toaster and it's causing some smoke, but it's not a real fire, right? So what happens is sometimes we think that everything is a real fire, that every stressor is a real fire, and it might just be an inconvenience, or it might be a worry that's causing us some stress, and not actually be something that isn't a real life-threatening emergency. So we want to pay attention to those times where anxiety is trying to protect us. So it's trying to tell us there's a potential threat. For a lot of kids with ADHD or anxiety disorders, it's sending a lot of alarms that are, I want to say, like, I want to send the message, I'm listening and validating how they're feeling. Some of those alarms are not life-threatening, and it's still sending the same message. So the brain doesn't know the difference between a perceived threat and a real life-threatening emergency. It's just doing its job and it's responding to the threat. And then we kind of have to coach it that, yeah, okay, this is a little bit scary taking this test and I can handle it.
Such a great analogy. So if the smoke alarm is a little too sensitive and the toaster has set it off, we figure out how to teach the smoke alarm to be less sensitive, right? So that's our kids' anxiety. We got to teach our kids to not react life-threatening to non-life-threatening situations. We don't just take the smoke alarm off the wall and put it in the trash and say that all smoke alarms are bad because it annoyed us. So what can we use? What can we use to our advantage, especially for our kids with ADHD, with those extra struggles, with like what we know about the brain? How can we help them dial down that anxiety?
So one of the things I think is to really help kids understand what's going on. So whether it's ADHD or anxiety, I help kids and families and teachers to understand what's going on. So let's understand anxiety, let's understand ADHD and how they work. Then we have practical language to talk about it. So a lot of it is the language, and we can talk a little bit more about that if you'd like. And then there have to be some strategies or productive ways to respond to it. So some productive ways to respond when anxiety or worry shows up, and practical ways to talk about anxiety. Say, for example, I will hear a lot of catastrophic language when we're talking. It could be about a test. It could be about the learning loss that some folks have been talking about. It could be not making a team. It could be going to a sleepover. It could be anything. I'll hear sometimes catastrophic language from the child and the parents that this was a disaster. We'll never get over this. And that kind of language, we really have to start to notice. That sends alarm messages to the brain when it thinks, yeah, and when we're using that catastrophic language, it's like, whoa, this is serious. So we kind of have to start there and talk about it in different ways. And I can share, if you want, a couple ways that we do that. And teach kids about their brain, teach kids about how to notice their warning signs. Notice the thoughts that you're thinking. If it starts to be like a very inner critic kind of thinking, or like a dog barking in your head or a dragon coming out of the cave, notice those warning signs and notice how your body feels. And then there are some resets that you can do, some quick little resets to help pump the brakes so you can get your thinking brain back on chart, back in charge. And we can talk a little bit about those resets if you want.
I do want. Yes, you keep teasing us.
Okay. What do you want first? You want the practical language or you want the strategies?
Well, I mean, let's start with the language because, I mean, truly, again, listeners, how many of us have said those words? Oh, that was a disaster. I mean, it makes for a better story, makes for interesting conversation. But when our kids are listening in, or when we are internalizing that as reality, dangerous. I agree, Noel. Thank you for pointing that out. So how do we shift our language?
Yeah, even, when we say things like oh my gosh, the kids have the weight of the world. If they're hearing that, that's a scary thing to be hearing that. So it does make for better stories. And we should be aware that anxiety loves drama. Right? So we want to really start to notice how we're talking about things. And we want to validate and acknowledge the stress. We don't want to dismiss it. That's not a good idea either. So yeah, this could be hard. I can see you're concerned about this, and sending that message that you can handle it. So there's two words I like a lot, of course, and the words and. So actually 3 words. So instead of, like, for example, I do a lot of reframing with my students. if they were to say, yikes, that, this was a disaster, or this was the worst, I'll never catch up, that kind of thinking, we can reframe that to, of course, making mistakes is hard, and they will help me learn. So something like that, so that it's not sending the alarm message to the brain. By just putting the word of course in front of it, we're validating how that person feels. We're sending the message, worry's going to show up from time to time, to be expected. And instead of saying but, we throw the and in there, and that helps send like this message of forward movement. And if we can add like either an action step or an insight or a new way of thinking about this in a more productive, healthier way, or more helpful way, I should say, that sends a different message to the brain, and that can help you reset. So
it's
just
a combo
starting,
deal. Yeah, of course. And
yes,
is the validating and the positive forward motion. That's so simple. That's so simple. Thank you.
yeah, it's one quick little practical change.
Mhm.
I have a acronym I like too. This isn't my acronym. I learned this somewhere along the way, and it's the word fail. A lot of kids are afraid of making mistakes. We see a lot of mistake fear out there, and kids feeling they have to be perfect. Listen, kids, and listen, parents, there's no such thing as perfection. It's unattainable. It's about excellence and setting, goals that will help you achieve excellence. It's not about perfection. And so I put a lot of focus on improvement, not on the perfection side. But this acronym FAIL is, the F stands for first, the A is attempts, and the I in, and then L is learning. So sending that message that it's to be expected, you're going to make mistakes. It's to be expected when you're learning something new, that it may be hard and challenging, and it may take time. I think that kids sometimes get messages that the smart kids are the ones that finish quickly, and that when you learn something quickly, that means you're smart. And real learning takes time.
What a great reminder. I think for us adults sometimes too. All right. Now you said you could talk about some quick resets. So we did language.
Mhm.
What is a reset?
So a reset could be something, believe it or not, as simple as doing some breathing. So doing slow, deep breathing. And these are things that I typically do in like 2 minutes or less. I love 4-6 breathing, where you inhale for 4 seconds and exhale for 6. Now with younger kids, like for example, in my book, ABC Worry Free, I make the breathing a little bit more playful with the pizza breath, and I have the character imagining that he has like his favorite slice of pizza. He inhales the yummy aroma, and then he cools it down by exhaling, and just basically the breathing is slowing the game down, and it's sending a message to the brain to pump the brakes. So this is an effort to keep your thinking brain in charge. So I am a big fan of the breathing, and there's all sorts of great breathing techniques. Chris Willard, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He has a great book, Alpha Breaths, with, through the alphabet, he has like a different breath for each one. But anything that slows the game down. When we get anxious, we tend to breathe a little more shallow and quicker. So we want slow, deep breathing. Another thing is movement can be helpful. So if you could just take a quick little walk, like even around your steady space, it could go outside for a quick little breather, or walk the dog, do a quick little walk like that. You could even do like wall push-ups, just some kind of movement that's, just the brain likes movement. So all of the resets are about dialing into your senses. Okay, so the breathing is really about dialing into the air coming in through your nose, out through your mouth, noticing the rise and fall of your chest. Really dial into your senses. If you're doing like a walk, start to notice, the trees or the sounds or the sights. You could do it inside, you could do it outside if you're with your pet. Just start to really notice any kinds of sensory sensations. Another quick one that I like is, it's called counting colors. And you could just for brevity's sake, we'll just do a quick example. You could take 5 colors, but let's just take 3 colors. And if I said to you, Katie, in your office, see if you could find 3 things that are red. And you would just look around your space and see if you could find 3 things that are red.
Red pops out. I found like 6.
Yeah. Red is a big one. Yeah, I have a lot too. And then you could just pick 2 more colors. So let's say I said, okay, now find 2 things that are blue. You look around your space. And now 1 thing that's yellow. Now you could take 10 colors if you wanted. You could take 5, totally your call. But this is a mindfulness practice, and obviously very visual, because you're looking for the colors. And that can be a quick reset. It doesn't really involve any language for the child. And I mean, even getting a quick drink can be a quick reset. So some kids respond to certain ones better. It's good for kids to have some choices. The ABC strategy from my book incorporates 3 steps: accept how you feel, breathe slow and deep, and change your thinking. So that 3rd step is really about reframing how you're thinking about this stressor. And kind of going back to what we were doing earlier with the of course in the end. So that's a strategy. Like if I have kids I'm working with, they will have the ABC strategy posted on their workspace. Let's say that they know math or writing gets them stressed. We'll have, well, what do you have to accept about that? Well, I have to accept it's hard for me, or it takes me a long time to get math done. So when they start to get anxious about that, do their breathing. That's the 2nd step. And then change how you think about it. So we'll come up with a different way of thinking about the math or the writing. It's okay for me to ask for help, or it's okay if this takes it, or something like learning takes time. Learning isn't fast, and it's okay if this is taking me a little bit of time. So just something that won't be freaking the brain out. If they're thinking, I can't do this, this is way too hard, they're going to get stressed. So those are just some ideas that I can say I use a lot with my students.
And I imagine the adult needs to help and assist and kind of jumpstart those strategies very often, especially as the child is first learning them. Because as you said, when you're anxious, your executive function is blocked and your memory is blocked. You're not going to remember those strategies as the anxious child, right? So that's sort of up to the adult to really walk them through, I would guess.
Yes, and that brings up a good point. So we don't want to be teaching strategies when the kids are stressed, right?
Good reminder.
They're not going to be receptive. If we think about what's going on in the brain and the body when you're highly stressed, if a tiger walked into your office right now, Katie, even though you want to continue this conversation and we want to keep learning from each other, you would go to fight, flight, or freeze, right? You're either going to take on that tiger and fight it, you're going to freeze and camouflage yourself and hope he doesn't notice you, or you're going to hide, or you might just run out of the room. So it's not a time for us to say, okay, let's learn more about anxiety, or let's learn more about executive. It's not happening in those moments. So when kids are stressed, it's not the time to ask them to use their words. I hear a lot of times we like, use your words, use your words. When they're highly stressed, it's very hard for them to find the right words. It's not the time to teach a strategy. So teaching it when the brain is calm is the time to do it. A firefighter wouldn't be showing up to a house that's on fire and learning under that stress. They would be doing a lot of drills when there was really no fire. And then when there is, they've trained to how to handle that stressor. So we want to really practice these stressors, or excuse me, practice these strategies when the stress is low.
That's a very important reminder. And I know I teach stress mastery techniques to adults, and I say we can't just try to tap into those strategies. Yeah, when we're already in crisis mode, we have to practice. So parents, right? We have to be proactive. We have to be intentional. We need to kind of think about this beforehand, because in the moment, in the moment of crisis, it's kind of too late. That's where you write a note to yourself, like, when everyone is calm, I will teach these strategies so that the next crisis is smoother, right?
And
Um,
honestly, I think modeling strategies for
mhm.
parents to be doing them themselves, if I'm noticing that I'm feeling some stress, I think it's great for me to say in front of my kids, I'm noticing that, my heart's starting to race, or I'm noticing that I'm getting really distracted. I think it's time for me to go do some of my breathing, or I think it's time for me to take a quick walk. It's a good thing for parents to kind of model some of these strategies so that the child thinks this is it's normal, which it is normal, and it's really showing them some great life skills of how to manage, difficult emotions and keep their thinking brain on charge. Keep their thinking brain in charge, I should say. So I think that kids are always looking. My kids are all grown, but they're always watching no matter how old they are, and they really look to us for how to handle difficult times and challenges.
Isn't that true? I mean,
Mhm.
I had an experience just a few days ago, just before dinner time, and it made me late for starting dinner. I was totally stressed. I was really angry because the customer service at happened to be Bed Bath and Beyond was so slow and was just unable to help me on chat. And a whole hour of my life had gotten sucked away, and I still wasn't even able to complete the transaction. I was
Ah,
I was beyond smoke alarm. Well, it was terrible. And I'm stomping about the kitchen, and I'm extra frustrated again because now I'm late getting dinner started. And my 10-year-old, who's just so sweet and such a cuddler, came up once and gave me a big hug. And I was like,
oh,
took my breath. I said, "Thank you, honey. I needed that." And then I got worked up again. He had to parent me with 3 nice big hugs, and it was just so special because I was able to, thank him at bedtime, tuck time, and say, "Buddy, thank you for those calming hugs. I really needed those, and I did need all 3. You were right, and it totally helped." And so I think but that is some of the modeling, right? That's another reset, is the touch and the hug, and kind of co-regulating the breathing, especially for our little ones.
yes, yes. So some people like that touch part, and it's just what you shared. Your son sounds like he didn't even have to say anything.
Mhm.
It just was the hug, and that was enough to kind of help you start to pump the brakes.
Mhm.
One thing that we should mention too, that I hear a lot, I know that I'm guilty of saying it at times, and I really catch myself, is we might say, "Don't worry about it," or
Mhm.
"You're worried about that," and that is not helpful at all. It's not effective for kids who are anxious. It dismisses how they're feeling, and
Right.
it doesn't help them build a skill. So the biggest message I think that I want to send is anxiety and ADHD, it needs skill building. It
Mhm.
is manageable. It's definitely, anxiety is something that you can manage. When it's left untreated, it can morph into depression.
Mm.
So I want to really send that message that it is a treatable kind of situation.
Good. Yeah. And what a good reminder that we don't want to dismiss or devalue the worry. And that's what, of course, does the validating and the valuing and allowing the kids to know that they're heard. And okay, so the risk of anxiety is unaddressed, untreated, as that can change into depression. And now we've got, I mean, it's not like, well, no, it's like it changes, it just adds on, right? Now we're stacking challenges up for our poor kids. We talked to Noel about how the anxiety is a bit like that smoke alarm, and sometimes the level of sensitivity needs to be adjusted. You gave us some really great practical strategies for in the moment. Do you have any ideas for us as parents, especially if we have a child who really seems to struggle over and over, right, with the anxiety? Do we have any sort of long-term strategies to readjust that sensitivity of their anxious smoke alarm?
Well, I think that all the things we talked about, like noticing your warning signs, teach kids about their brains.
Okay.
We teach kids that they have to learn every bone and muscle in their body, yet I don't think we teach them enough about their brain and how they can use it to their advantage. So there's, great little video. Ned the Neuron talks about neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to continue to grow and change based on how you use it. So I think that can give kids hope, and it's kind of like this superpower that they have. And I find they really respond to learning about their brain. So teaching kids about their brain, teaching them to notice their warning signs. Good way to talk about that is even just thinking about, looking at the weather. You start to notice, oh, there's some storm clouds over there. It's getting a little bit darker. What does that tell us? So starting to notice your warning signs. Oh, some worried thoughts. I'm kind of noticing that inner critic is coming into my brain. I'm feeling a little bit of tightness in my chest. Noticing those warning signs and then doing some resets, especially the breathing is always my first go-to, but any reset that works for a child, and helping them start to build some skills. And, like we were saying earlier, parents love their kids, and it can feel like the intuitive caring thing to do, to want to overprotect them. Yet in the short term it will decrease the anxiety, in the long term it will increase the anxiety. So we
Mhm.
want to be really mindful of that. We don't, we want to help the kids build skills that they're going to need in life to deal with daily challenges.
Right. And it's like so many things, the easy, quick, convenient fix is that we call it the short easy is the long hard.
Uh-huh.
Short hard is the
Yeah.
long easy. That was from Becky Wells' interview. That's just such a great dichotomy of, okay, like choose the short hard because that makes the long easier.
Yeah.
And so many good strategies, good tips, good. I mean, I want to almost say like a brain reset or a perspective shift has really happened for me. And I hope a lot of the other listeners today, Noel, and just how we can see beneath the surface of our kids' behavior, see their anxiety, help them to build these skills over time that they can use in the moment. I love to end with a story of hope and a message of positivity. So how would you encourage parents, especially if they're maybe a little anxious about their kids with anxiety?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I think we have to be mindful of as parents is it our anxiety that's talking sometimes, right? Sometimes we might be a little bit too enmeshed, and taking things a little bit personally if a teacher doesn't like our child or something, and we're thinking, oh, how will I get over that? Or taking that personally. So I think being, mindful of our own kind of anxiety, and we can work on that as well. I have an anxiety disorder, and I've worked really hard on that. And honestly, through a lot of the strategies we've talked about, has been really, really helpful in managing it. And I work with a lot of kids who have had school refusal, who wouldn't go to school, who are now going to school, through a lot of practice and thinking. We're basically trying to have a new relationship with anxiety, right? Once you learn about anxiety and how it works, it's very predictable, and it doesn't really necessarily matter what the trigger is so much. It's going to react the same no matter what, really, no matter what the trigger. So once you realize, okay, that's my worry showing up, what can I say back to it? How can I respond to it in a more helpful way? Starts to normalize it a little bit, and you start to take charge of it. So I have, most recently worked with a student who would get so stressed at anything challenging or anxiety provoking, he couldn't even really speak. He would just scream
Oh,
and or grunt. So he's now able to respond, and it was really getting in the way of his learning and ability to have friends. So that has been really powerful to see him make great progress. And then I even have some college students. One of my most recent students was undiagnosed with ADHD, And then her first year at school didn't go so well, and she was on academic probation. And she's learned a whole set of skills to help her ADHD. And she just got a 4.0. And I almost didn't even want to share that because I don't like to put the emphasis on the 4.0. That just blew me away. If she had just gotten off academic probation, I would have been thrilled. So she just really was so motivated and so great at practicing the skill. So a lot depends on how much buy-in that the child is willing to do. So that was an example of somebody who really, she was ready. She was really ready to put the time in. So yeah, we didn't talk as much, maybe another time, about some strategies, like specific ones for ADHD to kind of help kids with that how part. There's a lot of great visual strategies that can help them. Like if I said to my kids, go clean your room, their picture is very different from my picture of what the end result's going to look like. So that can apply to anything, whether it's homework, or doing chores, having some visuals of what the expectation and the steps look like.
Well, so many good practical strategies. It's hard to believe we missed anything, but obviously the knowledge is deep and wide. So thank you so much. Thank you for that example, those stories, and that reminder, my goodness, that we can have a relationship with anxiety rather than just trying to get rid of it. And that the skills we teach our kids as a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old, they're going to apply to every situation as they grow. So it's really an investment in their future and their future mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said.
Oh, thank you so much, Noel Foy. We will send everyone over to your work and to find you at neuronoel.com. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I post a bunch of tips on anxiety and executive function at NeuroNoel. So if anybody does the social media, feel free. I'd love for people to follow. It's not like a personal kind of posting. It's all about education.
Perfect. We will share all those links wherever we share this interview.
Awesome.
Listeners, we will be back next week with another expert to help you raise healthy, independent adults. Feel great about your parenting at the end of the day. I'm Katie Kimball for Kids Cook Real Food.